doing this.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the
1974.
the last showcase of the year for Hunter Living Histories, and I'd just like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the people, and I'd like to extend my invitation to the elders, both past, present, and emerging, for joining us proceedings today. And I also extend acknowledgement of countries to the people who are zooming in today and the countries zooming from, and pay my respects. In addition, I'd like to welcome any Indigenous First Nations people. Welcome to this gathering, and I hope that you find it informative. So we've got a couple of presenters today, and then I'll be giving our 2020 report in 2024, which is really good. And Anne, would you like to introduce our first presenter?
Yes, yeah. Can I welcome Dr. Heather Kemba, who has been part of a cultural mapping project at the University of Newcastle with Aboriginal community, and it's also involved one of our students, Bethany. So yeah, we've got a presentation. I'll hand over to Heather. Thank you.
Can we stay here or back up there?
Well, if you go to the front,
Okay.
we'll see you.
Sure. Although it's on the presentation. See.
Oh, okay. Get it going.
Okay.
Thank you. Hopefully folks here and online can hear me okay. So I also want to just pay my respects to country and peoples and acknowledge all of the stakeholders and community members that were part of the project, and also thank colleagues that were involved in it as well. So in particular, my colleague David Newham, who was the sort of Indigenous engagement lead for the project, Anne and Bethany here as part of the archive team have supported in helping with sort of the video editing and getting things onto the Living Histories website. And from the Institute for Regional Futures, we had Kate Tim and Zoe Mackie Craig and Courtney Beckett, who were research assistants who helped out with sort of reporting process and things like that, and that engagement with stakeholders, and Gillian Shaw in the art at the gallery as well. So I suppose a bit of context. At the Institute for Regional Futures, we were asked by state government partner at the time, the government architect, to help them out or to work with them on a project around mapping knowledge in the Hunter region. And interestingly, I suppose, maybe for those here that are more involved in sort of history, there is this sort of growing awareness and need that the built environment, so all of our buildings and spaces, do reflect sort of Aboriginal heritage, reflect country, as well as European heritage, which has sort of largely been presupposed recently. But that does mean that there's quite a big capacity and capability gap in the industry. So I suppose if you think about architects who've gone to university and they've learned about European architecture, now all of a sudden they're being asked to learn about a different style of architecture and design and placemaking, and people are wanting it right now, and it takes time to learn these things, right? So this also requires changes to the way that we actually deliver projects as well, because it's not just a matter of, you know, insert person here, it's an actual different methodology entirely in some ways. So the Greater Cities Commission team, as I said, we're a state government department, they're now no longer a state government department, and they came to us, and their outcomes were that they wanted to map places and stories that hold sort of value and significance for Aboriginal people, and we were focusing obviously in the sort of Newcastle area. And it was also a bit of a pilot process for the actual project as well, in that we were thinking differently about what contracts looked like and procurement, and where there was more about partnership approach, and it wasn't the sort of need to own IP and things like that. So they were really open with us about, you know, the brief was very open-ended, which meant that we had an opportunity to sort of define what it looked like, and that gave a lot more control to community members. So our role was to sort of go out and engage to sort of help define what the scope of the project would look like, support delivery of the project, and then also to sort of document lessons. I guess it's a way to share back, particularly with industry, about what, I guess, best practice or what good can look like. So we obviously did some desktop review of other cultural mapping activities in the region, and I mean, particularly from those in the room here, you'd have a awareness that there is such a wealth of knowledge about the Hunter region, both Indigenous and post-colonial history, and obviously a lot of the great work that you guys do here. And so that was really lovely for us to have, I suppose, a really strong foundation of knowledge that already existed, and also process and methodologies. Dave went out and had sort of some yarns and chit chats with folks about, you know, what that might mean for them and what they thought would be a nice way to think about how knowledges and stories could be shared and sort of documented. And we knew it was also really important that whatever way we did this should be tailored to the individual and tailored to the relationships that we had with those individuals. So some of the feedback that we got was, again, there was awareness that there was quite a lot of, you know, existing historical information already that was documented about this area. Some people were interested to be involved, but maybe they didn't want to have their stories made public. And so, again, we knew it was important that we had a really tailored approach to each person. There was a real interest in sharing some more contemporary stories. So I think particularly from an industry and government perspective, when people talk about cultural stories, it's very much thinking about pre-colonisation, whereas in fact there was a real desire to sort of talk about how, you know, community is still proud and strong and there, and in fact there are lots of stories that those stories continue, and wanting to be able to sort of share that. And then also they wanted to be able to sort of have that conversation, so the oral history seemed like the right kind of way to go. So what we decided to do was to record some oral histories with a selection of community members, and to be honest, that was defined by the budget that we had. Each individual, once we did the recording, was able to make decisions about what could be public and not. So it could end up being that there's only a few minutes of an hour and whatever long recording that is made public, and that's completely fine. And also at any point in the future, obviously that individual can say, I've had enough now, and that gets removed. And I guess at the same time as us doing the project, the university had developed its Indigenous cultural and intellectual protocol sort of documentation. So the community guide in particular was really helpful for us, because we had a booklet that we could go out to community with and said, okay, well, this is quite easy to understand, to the point that I can even understand all of that legal jargon to help have those conversations about what ICIP was and that kind of thing. As I said, each individual could decide for themselves what stories they wanted to record and share. We left it open that people could decide where the recording session would be, and again, Anne was incredibly helpful in terms of understanding the technology and things like that. And we thought that people might want to do the recording somewhere out, on country, or in a place that felt comfortable for them, or in their home. But in fact, everyone wanted to come here to the studio, which was super interesting. And I thought maybe that was a nice change or an opportunity to actually get to be in a professional quality recording studio. And then we gave the recording to the stakeholders and their families. We'd initially thought about that because that recording itself was kind of a gift to that community member, that we wouldn't also provide remuneration. Again, there was budget constraints, but some feedback that we got early on was that it was important that we also compensated people for their time, so we reworked the budget to make that possible. So what we were able to do is, from the stories that were shared, those oral histories, the full recording is preserved in the archive, and then also provided to that community member. Short extracts have been uploaded to the web, again with permission, and those are made public, and they're going on the Living Histories site, thanks to Anne and Bethany's hard work there. We were also able to commission an artwork by a local artist who went through an EOI process, and that artwork was based on all of the stories that have been shared and have been sort of brought together into an artwork, and that's just been finished. I'll show you that on the next page. And we're getting some signage done. So each of the uploaded stories is going on a QR code on a sign somewhere around Newcastle that sort of is related to the story. So it kind of means that we're starting to create a cultural trail. And so obviously we're hoping that in the future there might be sort of interest in extending the trail a bit further. So just a couple of images up the top there. You've got, I guess, the draft of the Living Histories page, which will go public relatively soon. And this is the artwork itself by Gavin Kell. So in terms of delivering the project, I've left this in there, but this is things that I think would be bread and butter for you guys. But when presenting this to architects and infrastructure types, it was really interesting that we wanted to share this kind of really fundamental information about how to do oral histories and how to work with stakeholders. So that was just that capacity building. It was interesting to learn how much capacity needs to be built in that space. And then we sort of had a list of lessons that were, again, from an infrastructure perspective, infrastructure project delivery perspective, is still relatively new. So thinking clearly about what ICIP is, and particularly for a physical space, if you have ICIP embedded within a design of a space, what are the implications of that? I think is still being worked through and understood. It was important that we had some flexibility in our project delivery. So obviously the compensation piece was an important one here, but in general, project managers, and I am one too, so I know that there's an element of rigidity sometimes, but it's important to be as flexible as you can be because not everything goes in a straight line. Flexible procurement was really important. So typically for government procurement, they'll have a brief that says we want A, B, C, D, but they may not have engaged with community members about whether they want A, B, C or D. So we were able to demonstrate that even when they gave an open brief that said, we want something like this, that we could still give them back something that's actually within great value for money. Not making assumptions and being able to be responsive to the needs of stakeholders. So again, we assumed that stakeholders want to be more comfortable out somewhere in the country, but in fact they all wanted to come here. It might have also been air conditioning, I don't know. And we also realised it was really helpful that we were locally based here in Newcastle. I guess, we're fortunate that, David had some great relationships already, so was able to sort of draw on those relationships to build comfort for participation, which I think it's been harder, really doing this project, say in Sydney or somewhere else where it wasn't his community. So I think that was just a really good reminder that those local relationships are really valuable. That is all. Thank you.
Any questions for Heather?
I have a question, Heather. When will the content go live on Living Histories?
I think within days, I imagine. It's all drafted, and there was just a couple of final things to check off in terms of, particularly around the artwork, making sure that it's, all of those permissions are there and things like that. But once that's done, we're hoping for the next week or so. In terms of signage, we've seen a draft of the signage now. So again, hoping that will at least go off to print this week, and finance cut off on Friday. So there's a nice deadline for Friday as well. So. Great.
So how much signage do you have?
We're going to have 5 signs, sort of smaller ones that have got, so there's the 5 QR codes, 5 stories. And then there's the original artwork, and there's going to be a sign next to that, obviously telling the story of the artwork. So the artist has sort of written up, because there's quite a lot of meaning and layers within that piece. And so there's a really beautiful story that goes along with that, and that'll be in the city campus somewhere. And then we may have a larger detail of like a reproduction effectively of the artwork going across a Q building. So sort of about, 7 stops on the trail so far. But there's, great scope, I think, to sort of extend it from there at some point in the future.
Are there any examples of that posted to you?
Oh, it was just that piece that was up there. I can,
Oh, yeah.
That's good. Where are we? Oh, sorry. Lost it. There we go. There we go. There we go. So that's the piece just there. So the signage will have kind of elements of that artwork, but that's sort of a digitisation of the original piece. It's quite big, actually. It's sort of, you know, we took up the whole back seat of the car to sort of take delivery.
It's going to be housed in the gallery, so the university.
Yes, the University Gallery has it. I'm not sure where it will get hung up, but it will be somewhere public, and I can obviously update you all once.
Where is it now?
This piece now, it's sitting in the gallery at the moment, so just here at Callaghan, but it's not actually up on. It's not up on display yet. So.
Seen it in rain. But, I was rather interested in when I got the Shortlands eye chart, and that the one that was at Taunton had had located natives on both sides of the river, and actually located them, and just with natives from there, and you see, and of course they disappeared completely from all modern maps. So, and I was anxious at the time, but I can't remember the time when I actually got it. It's a long while ago.
What you've got there. We have a look at what you've got.
Oh
there.
yeah, that's just a photograph of the slide that I got from Taunton years ago. But it was just a like that. But I was really pleased to get that, and we did make it known around the town and to the Aboriginal groups and at the time that this is the first time that the natives were actually located on a map, and did you talk with my friend up at what's her name?
Carol Ridgway.
No, she wasn't one of the ones, but I know that she's been involved with some oral history work that you've been doing, Anne. Is that right? Yeah.
I think this is a project related to Newcastle.
Yes.
Isn't it? So it's very Newcastle focused.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And that was driven by the state government's kind of request, I suppose. It was wanting to focus on Newcastle and
that eye sketch, we have a high resolution copy from
Yeah.
Taunton on the side. It's also in the exhibition downstairs.
Yes.
So yeah, it's
It's done by Shortland.
yeah.
The one by
Yes,
Shortland.
it's actually on this. This is that I did that. It's just printed off from the
Microcard.
what do you call it? The microfilm card. You know, that's the library card. Came from Taunton. But strangely enough, when I took it to the local editor, and I wanted an article done on it, you know, really showing those things. They found that the Shortland's original chart wasn't clear enough, so they printed one that was done in Shoe Lane in 1810 or something
Well,
like
that was the one that missed the natives. So
okay.
the heading 10 removed the natives from the original sketch.
So I thought that was that's the way. That's how what happened to.
Doug is showing
to
an
the
example of how history research used to be done on
Yeah.
microarts. Yes, so it's all been an evolution.
Yes.
Any other questions from Zoom land?
Right.
No?
Can I just make a comment? I just think with you mentioning Dave Newham's sort of leading the conversations, and him knowing so many people was a big advantage, I think. And I know Bethany and I, we often talk about the interviews and the content and the connection of what we've got in our sort of archive as well on Living Histories. There were just a lot of links made, and even like a future project could be, Saretta Field in particularly mentioned a lot of events that are in the NBN News archive. So again, using our community to engage and enriching the items that we have on Living Histories.
Yeah. Just to comment, Dave would have wanted to be here today, but he has a 2-week-old baby, so he is. I think baby had first doctor's appointment today, so that's what he's doing today. So I'm obviously, wanting to give him due credit. He would have wanted to be here today as well.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Shall I leave this?
Thank you for the team and okay, our next presenter is Peter Davies. So Peter is the son of Spiro. So when his father passed away earlier in the year, I started getting these emails about this site, which was the history of Hunter Street, and all these people very concerned about what was going to happen to this site because it was very important. And we had used the site as well when we were tracking down some obscure inquiries, so we knew of its existence. But I had 3 emails and phone calls from various places, unrelated, all worried about this site. So it was really wonderful when Peter got in touch with us about his father's work, and it was very timely because we also had people from the mall who were organising a big sort of mall party, and they needed someone to talk on the history, and they were asking us, and I said, well, have I got the person for you? And so we connected Peter in with that. So Peter is here to talk about the legacy of his father, the website, and future projects maybe for our career-ready students in 2025. Over to you, Peter.
Great. Thank you everyone for having me here today and being able to sort of talk about my dad and what he achieved and his life and so forth. So as John said, my dad Spiro passed away about 6 weeks ago. He was, by all accounts, a bit of a visionary as an individual. He grew up here in Newcastle and he was very entrepreneurial from the start. He spent his younger years as an electrician, and he was actually going around Newcastle wiring up buildings, setting up lights, and a lot of venues that are still either standing today in Newcastle or have been subsequently demolished over the course of time. But he had a bit of a history of working with a lot of businesses across Newcastle from that space. He then moved into what became a really lifelong passion for him around amateur radio. So ham radio, and his call sign was VK2YHX. And up until he passed, he was a proud member of the West Lakes Radio Club. And even up until the days that he passed, he was actually the chairman of the club, and he was hosting weekly meets with fellow amateur radio individuals from across Newcastle and outside of Newcastle as well. He was quite technically proficient, so he was very good with technology, computers, and so forth. But he also had a passion for music. And then in the early 70s, he established Soundworld as a record store, originally in Cardiff, before opening up another location in Mayfield, and then subsequently had it was called Green Apple before it was taken over by Westfield at Tara, and then Hunter Street Mall. And then in the last years of Soundworld, there was also a store in Maitland on the High Street there. So at any given point, there are around about 3 Soundworlds operating throughout Newcastle for roughly around, I think it's 35, 36 years was the duration of the businesses. Outside of Soundworld, he had a lot of hobbies and personal interests. Some of those were around fibre optic cables and wireless internet. He actually was part of a small community of people here in Newcastle. There was a fellow friend of his who passed some years ago now called Chris Deere, who set up one of the first internet providers here in Newcastle called Hunterlink. And Dad's relationship with Chris allowed him to sort of go into this new business world of internet and connectivity in the 90s. And so they actually mustered up a plan to install fibre optic cable along Hunter Street before the NBN was even considered or thought of at the time by the government. So they were doing this, and then off the back of that, he started then setting up Wi-Fi hotspots across Newcastle. So he was doing this all just for the passion and for the love and the joy of just being able to push boundaries and do things quite differently and his way, which was kind of who he was. In his, we come from a Greek background, Greek heritage. His family's from the island of Ithaca, and my mum is also Greek, and she's from the mainland of Greece as well. And so through that, Dad grew a big passion for Greek heritage and connecting back to the homeland essentially. And really, what started to happen in his later years in life was he became quite intrigued by the history of the Greek community within Newcastle. So about 10 to 12 years ago, he actually set up the history of Greek cafes and milk bars in Newcastle. And so he started to, through his family, so his father, so my grandfather had a fish and chip shop where Pacific Park is now in town, which is obviously a park that used to be buildings. And there was many other Greek entrepreneurs in Newcastle who established fish and chip shops and milk bars, not just on Hunter Street, but around the city as well. And so he took it upon himself to actually start to document this. So he spent a lot of time documenting both the history of Greek cafes in Newcastle, and then also he also built our De Vere's family tree. He spent many years and interviews and so forth, collecting information and data from Greece and also from people here in Australia, and actually pulled together the De Vere's ancestry, which still today lives on online. He managed to keep it going and updating it. And so what happened off the back of the Greek cafes was he created this extensive historical sort of tribute to the Greek cafes, and then he started to sort of plot them on a map. And so through his research and so forth, he started to notice some inconsistencies that were happening within Hunter Street, some of the business names, the numbering, realized there were different numbering systems that have been over the years of Hunter Street changed due to various changes in the street patterns and so forth. And so what really became off the back of this was he then dives really deep into Hunter Street. So you can see here, this is actually the website. I've just
Okay, everyone. Okay, so it's wonderful having Doug Lithgow here because this is part of the who we are and what we do. So the Hunter Living Histories is one of the Newcastle University's flagship community engagement organisations.
What was it called before Hunter Living?
Well, I'm getting to that
Oh,
point,
no,
Suzanne.
sorry.
I'm only one paragraph in.
Sorry.
All right. We started 21 years ago, Doug, when Doug was a fine young man in 2003 as the Coal River Working Party, Suzanne. That's what we were originally called. And Doug approached the university to have academic scrutiny into the history of Newcastle's birthplace, which was the Newcastle East End and the Coal River Precinct in particular. And so the university responded. We had a chair, Dr. Eric Eklund from the Department of History, and it's been basically evolving ever since. And we're now in our 21st year. We're broadened to include the regional footprints of the University of Newcastle, which is the Hunter and Central Coast regions primarily. So we're here basically to protect the primary source records of this region. That's everything, dating back as far as it needs protecting, which is Aboriginal First Nations worlds, including the European roles and the Greeks and the Italians as well. So that's what we do, and we also enjoy, as part of the university, bringing students and academics together every month to discuss matters of importance. It might be commemorations, it could be issues of difficulty in the communities, whatever it might be. We we try to encourage that collaboration and results. And that's basically the achievements is what I'm going to go through with you today, just in terms of this year. So as I said, every year I get quite desperate this time because I feel like I've done nothing. I feel like I just been strangled by weeds. And then I have a look at all the things that we've done during the course of the year and I suddenly get very, very happy. So we start off by thanking our volunteers. So these are the volunteers that mainly work out of the GlamX lab, of which all these things, or most of them, will not be done if they weren't here. And that's Lee Budden, Terry Bush, Mitchell Cassilis, Melissa Cousins, Glenn Cook, Kim Dempsey, Robert Farquharson, Angus Glasper, Anne Kay, Philip Lloyd, who's also an adjunct lecturer, Colleen Holman, Mark Rigby, Michael Sheriff, Jessica Waugh, and Sarah Zenos. So together, that group has donated 3,225 volunteer hours during 2024. And when we do our calculations based on generally a Q4 and also a $44 per day charge that it costs the volunteer to come here, they've given to the university in kind $215,666.27. And to make it clear, that's only 23% of what we pay the Vice Chancellor. So I reckon that's great value for money. Now, we also have to thank our community supporters, Barry Nankaro, Steve Legg, Jan Welsman, Steve Bates, Mary Boddy, Andrew Ricardo, who have also helped, as well as our Career Ready placement students and our staff and community supporters. So, at a glance, the Living Histories platform has had 12.9 million views. That's November when I started doing this. So in January next year, I'll update all these figures. There's our Flickr site's had 76.6 million views. Our YouTube channel has had 82,000 views this year with 240 new subscribers. The Living History site itself has had 134,178 views to the 2nd of December. We've had 48 and counting posts, which we'll go through, that have been researched and created and published. Unto Living Histories has hosted 36 guest presenters. You pair make it 38. Anyway, all right, so here we go. Despite Australia saying no to The Voice, we continue to listen to the voices of Aboriginal First Nations people. So this year, Under Living Histories posts by Aboriginal First Nations people and descendants included at the beginning of the year. Q Paul and Paul Walsh and Suzanne Harvey. This is the 25th anniversary of Yallowa Place. That's what began the year for us, and it took in all the work that was done in preparation during 2023. So it was wonderful being there in the rain, watching this place get rededicated, and seeing the wonderful cake that was made, that was eaten as well. We had Warrini woman, Carol Widgway-Bissett, address us at the March 2024 showcase. That was, to me, very transforming experience, and got me to rethink how we do these kinds of sessions, especially to Aboriginal people. Our Wabical descendant Shane Frost actually wrote a book on the 1841 Proctor chart, which had been up online since 2025 and discovered by Mark Rigby's brother, Russell Rigby. So he wrote an entire book. So each one of these links that I've got on this report is like a deep dive into the work of people. Robert Leslie Siren of Warimi, Gringai and Biripi Man made a video on how to craft a shield. If you're ever having a stressful day, the video was filmed with the gentle rain, and it's just lovely to watch him fashioning a shield in rain. So these are particular things. Uncle Bill Smith's biography was written by Dr. Greg Blyton, who was formerly of the university. He came and launched the book with Uncle Bill's wife and Gloria, his and daughter Cheryl. That's when you go to the loo. It's all out there. Well, you've got to be careful when you get on the loo. No. And Lee Budden also wrote a couple of posts on Biriban, a warrior not a servant, which was very popular, having a look at the evidence around Biriban, and also the search for John Fraser's lost 1882 journal. So, empowering Aboriginal First Nations resources or researchers, this is the work that were basically done in basically enabling Aboriginal people to be able to research the history. So we had the Stan Masterson papers, which were officially donated by Dr. Raymond Kelly, and then we had another set of people helping us fully describe them. So one of them was Elisa Peachman, who was an Indigenous cadet from Rutherford Technology High School, and Samantha Dagg from the Hunter Workers, formerly Newcastle Trades Hall Council, who assisted. So we got that material up online. We also got all the links and presentations from the New South Wales Archaeological Forum that was held at Marook. We also compiled quite deep dives for what we call family descendants, seeking answers as to whatever happened to Margaret and Ned's land at Lake Macquarie. So that was quite wonderful, and also repurposed for the architecture students that were doing studies as well. And we also wanted to get to the heart of Terra Nullius and what it was based upon. So we did a deep dive into the rare book collections, chasing up Captain Cook's, or at the time Lieutenant Cook's, account of when he actually took possession on behalf of King George of this land. And not forgetting that the Stories of Our Town team of Glenn and Tony also did a history of Nobby's Wabagamba, which has been up online as well. Reimagining our places and spaces. So these are sort of the housing crisis, was the year of the housing crisis, so we also wanted to shed some academic light on this. So we invited Mr. Joe Flood, who was a principal research scientist and leader of housing research at the CSIRO from 1977 to 1993, to give us the history of, how public and affordable housing once worked, why it went belly up, and what we need to do to get it back on track. So we had him give us the historical perspective. We had a student, brilliant student, Enzo Guy, also known as Jason, an architecture graduate, showing us what kind of proposals these students were coming up with for Broadmeadow, which was just absolutely inspiring. And then we had Dr. John Mackenzie, consultant at the Institute for Regional Futures, to give us the reality check on the environment that these people are now working in, all right? So we want to open that kind of discussion and that collaboration so people are getting as much information as possible. Mapping also helps us to reimagine our places and spaces. So at our September showcase with new technologies, we invited Graham Hill, who's the director of the Spatial Lab, to come in and show us an app that he had built to try and present some of our plans, maps and plans, and also have a talk about how we could, what kind of mapping we could incorporate in this sort of work. The future of our past, the City of Newcastle's thematic history consultants came to visit us and ask our 2 bobs worth, and we gave our 2 bobs worth about that. So those records are there. All these things were basically recorded, so if you need to go back and have a look, please have a look. On a local note, we relocated the University Prince thesis collection downstairs, and while I was going through these things, these theses were just starting to talk to me. So we did a blog post on that, and it seemed to strike a chord with past alumni, but also people currently doing their degree, their thesis right now. And this was my favourite comment from Rita Hitching. Thank you for sharing your recent efforts to relocate the UON print thesis collection. As a PhD student towards the latter part of my journey, I found it moving and inspiring. The thesis is indeed an important milestone, a higher degree in graduates, but more importantly, the thesis is not only the work of the author, but also the wider family who supports the graduate. Without the devout vocation to education and research, librarians like you and Karina Saunders, my PhD journey would not be possible. Thank you for being part of my wider family. So that's, to me, just love the fact that students feel like they're part of a family here, and that's what we try and build by looking after their work. So Anne, do you want to take over? This is the enhancing the experiences of students.
Yes, I'll just give a summary of the students that we've had this year. So many thanks to all the Career Ready student placements. They've all made a wonderful contribution. So we had Deborah Mullenbyer, who was an alumni of the Open Foundation and then worked on the Open Foundation 50-year project and exhibition. She worked with a bigger team and was successful in the academic division, highly commended. So it was a really lovely sort of experience for her and then acknowledgement. After that, so there's a link to the page where she's embedded in, says an exhibition at the university. So she was able to 3D scan the exhibition, then embed the individual portrait photos and the stories of the 50 faces of people that did the Open Foundation over the 50-year period. We also have Isabella Krebit, who's an intern doing her PhD in forensic anthropology. She's built up her skills using the 3D handheld scanner in the lab. So she's gone and rescanned some of our small to medium artefacts, but then developing her skills that she'll be sort of using in the field as an archaeologist in her work in the future. Other students, have we got?
Reese was in
Reese, yeah.
Rewind.
So Reese was our Vera Deacon intern this year, and Reese worked with us on the Rewind Hunter Region NBN television retrospective, which was quite a successful exhibition because it did involve a lot of what we call the ex-NBNers and former staff of the television industry that were able to help co-curate the exhibition to make sure that we had the context right, we had the name of the equipment, we had the years correct. So it was a really lovely experience, I think, for Reese to curate some artefacts to go with the images. This is a photo of Jan Welsman, who was the first woman to work at NBN television back in 1963, and she sort of came in. We had quite a few people visit that worked in the industry, come back and reminisce.
Can I say that I was the one who told Jan about the photos here?
Oh,
Because
great.
she's in the Merriweather Historical Society.
Excellent.
And just after I'd seen them here.
She told us that there were no female toilets invented at the time.
There were
is
no
that right?
That'd be right. That would be right.
Yeah,
It's amazing. So
every
female
person's got a
toilets were
story.
invented after 1962.
And again, we've 3D scanned the exhibition and we have that online. So that's just a nice legacy to be able to showcase the exhibition. Then we've got a photo of Bethany, who's with us today. As mentioned, she worked on the Oral History Cultural Mapping Project. And yeah, just a thank you to Bethany for being part of the team and working with us. And also being gracious enough to be part of a promotional video for the university and the HAS to promote the Work Integrated Learning program to future students.
And she did a fantastic job at the Unrolled exhibition by creating a timeline of, was it the 31, because that's right. 31 most important plans of the region. So we've now got it in a timeline, which was great because I used to have to go through them over and over again. And we thought Bethany would be fantastic if she do a timeline. She did it. So it's on that site as well. So thank you very much, Bethany.
And then we had our international students, Michaela and Kamika, who worked well together in creating some podcasts. They were really interested in professional practice of people across the university. So they did some interviews, fairly sort of short interviews, but quite specific questions to really hone into what it was like to be a historian, geologist, archivist, conservator, historian. So yeah, they were able to sort of build up their
Questions.
technical skills, improve their English skills. And then Michaela and I did an interview with Kay Duffy, who worked in newspapers in Newcastle and television. And again, the whole theme of just interviewing, finding out more about different specific industry and how things have changed. So that was a good experience for Michaela. So there's a link to the podcast. And then a student earlier in the year was here when there was a commemoration of the Cygnus storm that happened 50 years ago over at Stockton Beach. So again, we did an interview with Clem Doyle, who was part of, it was before the SES was established, but that volunteer group that went out during the storm to help people in need. And then we have the University of Newcastle's student posters from 1970 to 1990s. And we've had a volunteer, Kim Dempsey, work on that. And that's up online. Now, Jenny, do you want me to hand back to you for the Empowering Researchers?
So the Empowering Researchers a week, you've got the 75th anniversary of the School of Education, which was worked on. Posters, which we've already covered. Shout out to the conferring of degrees videos, which Michael Sherrick and Angus Glasper have been working on. But Mitchell digitised or prepared all the videos that were recently recovered in the 2009 to 2013 period, so we got them all up online. So it's been really good. And next year we're going to get a whole heap of the ones from 2015 onwards. So we'll be bringing them all together. The Stories of Our Town was also fantastic this year. They've gone into production for their fourth film this year, which is the one on Ralph Snowball. But they did Val Blackett, who was the 17 or 18-year-old gunner that protected Newcastle during World War II. That full story didn't fit into the Fortress Newcastle story, so that was our first story for the year. Then they did one on the biography of Wybagamba Nobbies, again bringing researchers from the university in with community to tell these stories. And the last one that they completed was Shipwrecked Newcastle, which is on their shipwreck history, which is out there right now. So they've got another one that they're working on, again, that didn't fit into the shipwreck story on the Astromena. So people who are the last Hunt the Living Histories will have gotten the story from the marine archaeologists from the Australian Museum on that one. So hopefully they'll try and get that one out by the end of the year, and we'll see how the Snowball one goes. But their hit rates on their films have been going up. We're making a bit of a campaign to get them 4,000 subscribers on YouTube, because at 4,000 subscriptions, YouTube then starts divvying some of the advertising revenue to the channel owners. So they need to make more stories about town. So if you can ask all your friends to subscribe, there's no charge in it, it's free. You just click the subscription button. When they get to the magical figure of 4,000, then YouTube starts dishing out some dosh, which is what they need, and we get more stories about town. We got a shout out also in federal parliament. So I wrote an email to Sharon Clayton to help, and she went and told parliament about it. So we got sucked into Paul Darstor and another filmmaker whose name escapes me at the moment, and ourselves. So we all got sort of a shout out into a forever mention in Australian parliamentary answer. So you can see the various posts. We run the production diaries here, and they host the actual films on their site. They're all free to view, and they're fantastic. So if you get some time, just have a look through. So they're all those stories. We also are always on the lookout for anything that will help our researchers. So Shipwrecks of the Hunter, which was compiled by Norm Barney, we digitised that. And we also came across some Newcastle and Hunter watercolours by H. Grant Lloyd. So there. And also Chips Rafferty and Jack Jones, this fellow who lived in Mayfield, who helped support the birth of the Australian film industry, independent film industry. So we've got his correspondence there, which we digitised, and Andrew Mercato, who's working on a kind of a show at Formula
Flamingos,
Zots.
it used to be Lazots.
It's now called Flamingos,
History
so
of
this is the
television.
kind of information that we need. The earliest work of fiction set in Newcastle and Hunters River in our Red Book collections is there as well. With promoting academic research, we've also had a number of young emerging academics like Eleanor Foster, who's a PhD student with Trinity College in Cambridge, who's he just disappeared.
Oh my goodness.